where to start with the Penguin Classics Deluxe Editions. Are they worth collecting? Are there cheaper alternatives? And if you did want to start collecting them, how could you go about getting into this range of great works in these very lavish, high-quality editions? That's what we're going to talk about in today's video. I just want to start off by sort of giving an overview of what this series is. There are, to date, 126 titles in this series, as you can see on the Penguin website. But it's an ongoing series. There are new releases that are forthcoming from this 126. Some of them have not actually been released yet. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at a sort of a broad approach to collecting these books and alternatives, like I said. But as we always do on the channel, we're also just going to talk about the content of these great works themselves, and we'll do that over several episodes, 10 books at a time. Let me know what you think of these. How many of these do you have in this Penguin Classics Deluxe series? How many of these titles have you read? Without further ado, let's get into it. So I think for convenience sake, we can divide the Penguin Classics Deluxe editions into 3 categories. And these are my own categories, so make of them what you will. But in my mind, there are big individual texts, so large-scale, maximalist, realist novels, or massive epic poems on a grand scale. The second category that we find in this series is omnibus editions. Now, I've made a video talking about how to go about collecting omnibus editions, and I'll leave a link to that video above. But yeah, basically, in a nutshell, omnibuses are not quite anthologies. They are a collection of individual full-length works, so novels, memoirs, collections of poems. And those individual full-length volumes are actually collated into one massive mega omnibus. So that is the second category that we find in these Penguin Classics Deluxe editions. And then the third category is just standard length works, mostly of fiction, but maybe some non-fiction. So sort of medium length, common and garden variety novels of 300 odd pages, right? So those are the 3 categories. And my argument about whether these Penguin Classics Deluxe editions are collectible or not depends on which of these 3 categories the individual title fits into. So we're going to give examples of each, and we're going to look at actual editions from this series. I have 6 of them here. So let's start with that first category, the epic scale, large scope, maximalist, individual work. And we have got here, we are going to look at 3 of those. So we have got the Robert Fagles translations of the Iliad and the Odyssey. These are obviously epic poems, some of the founding documents really of Western culture and of the world literary heritage. And then we have got Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. This is a big 19th century realist novel. So these 3 titles are all big scale, and I would argue that in the Penguin Classics Deluxe editions, if you were going to invest in this series, that you could make a fairly strong case for buying books in this category, the individual large scale text. Now, why do I make that claim? That is because these books, in order to actually read a really big long book cover to cover, it's probably going to take you several weeks, possibly several months. So you're going to spend a lot of time immersed in this object, and it needs to be strong. It needs to hold up to that longer scale of reading time. You're going to carry it around with you in your knapsack. You're going to have it in your briefcase. You're going to have it in the glove compartment of your car. You might, lug it up the stairs with you at night to your chamber. your chamber. These Penguin Classics Deluxe Editions are they're well made, right? They're nice and floppy, which means that the spines don't crack easily. They're strong and sturdy. They've got quite big print as well. They have obviously the deckled edges and the French flaps. So you could make a pretty strong case for a good quality edition on those grounds. What is always important with such mountainous works that have had such a weighty impact on our culture, that come with this reputation of gravitas and authority, is to have good scholarly apparatus at your disposal. So good introduction and notes. And I would say that the Fagles translations of the Iliad and Odyssey are fantastic in that regard. They have really comprehensive introductions of, upwards of 50 pages. I think the Iliad's introduction is close to 100 pages, talking about the textual history of these works, talking about transliteration, talking about also showing geographically, maps of ancient Greece and where these narratives are played out. Exegesis of these texts themselves. Yeah, so in that sense, these two I think really hit the mark on all of those fronts. You can of course find these in cheaper editions, and we're going to have a look at that in a second. Then the Anna Karenina, this one is translated by Richard Pevier and Larissa Volokonsky, right? Famous couple actually, who are translators from Russian. They've done other major works as well. Again, nice and sturdy and solid. The introduction is a little on the light side. It feels like a bit more of a preface. It's only about 10 pages, and considering the enormity of this work and the impact that it's had on the history of Western literature and world, globalized culture, these almost mythic figures of Vronsky and Anna herself, the introduction was a little on the light side, but they are quite decent notes. We're going to look for each of these three categories. We actually are going to look at alternatives. So the alternative I've got here is Herman Melville's Moby Dick. All right. So this title is in the series of the Penguin Classics Deluxe Editions, but for probably almost half the price, you can get just a regular Penguin Classics edition. This one has a fantastic introduction by Andrew Del Blanco, with a bit of contextualizing information around Melville's process of writing this text and the sort of implications of this text on his career, on the literary tradition, as well as placing it within his body of work and how significant it is in comparison to some of his minor works such as Typee, or on the other end of the scale, his massively influential but slim individual story, Bartleby the Scrivener. So fantastic introduction, good notes. It's also got a lot of illustrations showing the journey that this infamous ship, the Pequod, makes. Also like real technical detail about terminology, nautical terminology. And also, yeah, just loads and loads of good scholarly support. And then, of course, the novel itself, what Philip Larkin called the fishy Dickens. It's definitely a facetious comment, because Melville and Moby Dick in particular is a lot more grandiloquent and supercharged in terms of the prose than Dickens. It's heavier. It's got a kind of meteorological weight to it that fits the content. The form fits the content because it's about this massive, almost endless undertaking, this massive journey of revenge and discovery to find this mythical or semi-mythical whale. And there is a kind of cosmic violence and brutality that pervades Moby Dick that is a few scales higher in terms of its excoriating philosophical inquest than most of Dickens, with the exception perhaps of a novel like Bleak House. A little bit less melodramatic as well. but I love that comment of a fishy Dickens. But nonetheless, look, this is a major novel on the larger scale of things. This is a perfectly serviceable edition that is much more affordable in the Penguin Classics Deluxe Edition. So that's an alternative in our first category. Then our second category is the Omnibus, right? So this is several individual works combined into an individual volume. They're getting a little bright outside. Lovely stuff. Spring is on its way. But for our purposes, it's perhaps a little bit too sparkly. That's a bit better. We're going to look at 3 omnibus editions in the Penguin Classics Deluxe series. We've got the short novels of John Steinbeck, 6 novellas in one edition. Now, immediately this category has something to offer because, yes, it's a deluxe edition. Yes, it's probably going to cost upwards of 25, maybe even 30 euros. Some of them are a bit less than that. But you get 6 for the price of 1. So that is a bargain in a certain sense. And what I also really love about omnibuses is that you often get lesser works that are a little bit harder to come by. They might be out of print. So with this is the first one we're looking at with the Steinbeck omnibus, of course, Of Mice and Men and Tortilla Flat and Cannery Row. Those 3 are fairly ubiquitous. They're readily accessible. But then The Moon is Down, The Red Pony, and The Pearl are a little bit less common, a little bit less major in terms of Steinbeck's oeuvre. So, I mean, you have the advantage of 6 for the price of 1. That speaks to it's a pretty strong reason to buy this, and the fact that you can find lesser works. I do have, for example, an old out-of-print edition of The Pearl, which is one of the first pieces of fiction that I ever fell in love with when I was a child. Really, I read it for the first time, and when I saw that it was a part of this omnibus, it was a big motivation to buy this edition. We've also got Jorge Luis Borges, The Collected Fictions. Again, this one's got 8 in it, if I'm not mistaken. 8 individual collections. Again, some of them are harder to find. Again, I have some of his works in individual collections, but not all of them. This one is translated by Andrew Hurley. We've got Edith Wharton, 3 novels of New York. It's a real doorstopper of an edition, but actually only contains 3 of her major works, and these 3 are The House of Mirth, The Custom of the Country, and The Age of Innocence. But, of course, there are always alternatives. It's not only Penguin Classics Deluxe Editions that brings out omnibuses, so I'm going to show you an alternative here. We've got the complete novels of Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. So right, this complete novels is also in the Penguin Classics Deluxe Edition series, but I've got an old edition from Chancellor Press. Perfectly serviceable. It's a nice, sturdy hardcover. It includes the original illustrations as well. It does the job, and this cost me, a couple of euros. So, you can find omnibuses out in the wild. Of course, the 4 Sherlock Holmes novels are A Study in Scarlet, The Sign of Four, The Hound of the Baskervilles, and The Valley of Fear. So in terms of the third category, which is the sort of common and garden variety individual text of short to medium length, published in the Penguin Classics Deluxe Editions. Now, I actually don't have any of these, which I think sort of consolidates my argument, because in my opinion, these are not really worth the investment in this deluxe series. They can be so easily found in cheaper editions, mass market paperbacks, even trade paperbacks from various publishers, and you don't need the real big, sturdy binding because they're shorter reads and they're less physically heavy. I'll just point out an interesting example, which is Lord of the Flies by William Golding. Right, this one is published in the Penguin Classics Deluxe Edition with an introduction by Stephen King. And I've got a cheap mass market paperback Faber and Faber edition with the same introduction. So you can literally get that Lord of the Flies edition with the identical introduction by Stephen King in a much cheaper. This one was like 2 books for £5 that I got a couple of years ago in Bristol. So for me, that's a clear argument against buying a deluxe edition on these shorter, regular length novels. Yeah, what I find really tragically ironic, I think Marx and Engels are probably turning in their graves, the Communist Manifesto. Right, the Communist Manifesto is published in the Penguin Classics Deluxe Editions. I mean, that is so funny in a way and tragic in another way, I suppose, depending on how you look at it. But yeah, this luxury consumerist paradise of this series, and then this book on the sort of founding principles of communism. You just can't beat the irony of that. But yeah, I mean, it's just a pamphlet, right? It's just a monograph. You can just pick this up. I've just got this cheap edition here from international publishers. Pick this up for a couple of dollars. You don't need a deluxe edition. And yeah, we'll come back to talking about this individual title. Yeah, so I suppose the only thing that you could say in argument in favor of the deluxe editions, other than the aesthetics of the covers themselves, which is fair enough, some of them are really beautiful, or that you want to collect the whole series, that's not my goal. The other argument would be that they have great introductions, but like I said with this William Golding with The Lord of the Flies, you can get those introductions elsewhere. So you know what? Let's actually just do what we do and dive into 10 of these titles. Pretty much all in alternative versions, and yeah, it's always fun to do that. Then you can decide for yourself whether these and we will comment on these individual texts in relation to the series as well. So this is a good place to start, right? The 4 complete novels. Obviously, we have plenty of Sherlock Holmes short stories. I think there are 54 Sherlock Holmes short stories, if I'm not mistaken. But then we have the 4 novels. Now, my favorite of these by far is The Hound of the Baskervilles. It's kind of spectral, eerie. It's set on the moors in this old, shadowy country house, and the strange story of this savage beast that is part dog, part something otherworldly that is, ripping people apart on the moors at night. And we have Dr. Watson, who is narrating most of the story because Holmes is conspicuously absent from the scene. Watson is writing letters to Holmes, filling him in on what's on the events as they're unfolding. But of the other 3, what they all have in common really is that they are really bifurcated. You have the kind of present time of the crime, or the mystery of the crime that Holmes is asked to solve. But then the second part of each of these stories really is retrospective backstory, and yeah, obviously right at the end of each of those novels, then it comes the stories are bound together temporally, and it all makes sense. But for me, The Valley of Fear has this kind of in fact, The Valley of Fear and A Study in Scarlet both are like American cowboy kind of setting in the backstories, and then eventually we find our way to London. And they are both stories of revenge. The Sign of Four has its backstory in the East, but yeah, it's great stuff. And if you really want an edition that you can return to and reread, then perhaps the Penguin Classics Deluxe Edition is for you. But I'm perfectly content with this second-hand hardcover from the Chancellor Press. The next book then in the 10 that we're looking at is part of the first category, the big individual works. This is not an epic. This is again a 19th century realist novel. I've got Fyodor Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, and I've just got this one in a good old stodgy, reliable, affordable, no frills Wordsworth edition. In their old livery, they've actually zhuzhed them up quite significantly, this series, but the Wordsworth is perfectly serviceable. But let's just talk about this book. Crime and Punishment, right? We have this sort of original incel, this feverishly misanthropic Raskolnikov and his, overheated cogitations, and this moral lesson about the danger of reducing humans and human interactions to dry theories and concepts, and missing out or forgetting about the individuality, the blood and flesh and psyches of these humans, the frailty of them, and the cosmic injustice that our world is replete with. The fact that there is crime and that there is punishment, but these are incongruous concepts that don't always that are not always redressed or rebalanced. History shows us that sometimes we need the excruciating, unspeakable individual suffering, the psychic pain on the most unutterable depth to sober us, to remind us, of the people we pass in the streets, of the crime statistics that we read about, the colleagues, the co-workers, the noisy neighbors, whatever it is, all of these individual people with their stories to tell, with their psychic agony, and also, warning about troubled minds and psychologically damaged people. And Raskolnikov crosses these lines, these boundaries, and in crossing these boundaries, he starts to lose his humanity. He turns himself into a monster. And can you come back from that? Can you come back from those existential outer limits? It's gruesome, but it's really gripping. It's absolutely superbly written. Right, we touched on this, the Communist Manifesto, as an individual title. It's got a naivety to it. It's got an idealism to it that, from our vantage point, is clearly, I think, unrealistic. In this notion that by overthrowing the capitalist or the leisure classes, that the working classes would rise up and not repeat those power struggles, that we would live in this utopia. I think for most of us, that's clearly not how the human spirit works. That's not how human interpersonal and inter-societal dynamics work. But you can't really claim to have an opinion on communism, on Marxism, without reading this. And it's a really thin little monograph. So if you haven't got your hands on this, don't be intimidated. It's really something that will take you in half an hour to read, and you can spend plenty of time reflecting on it or rereading it. It's an important foundational work of political economy, regardless of what you feel about the principles themselves. Then Lord of the Flies by William Golding. Like I said, we've got that introduction. It's a fantastic introduction in which King talks about how he came to love reading, and how Lord of the Flies was this early work that turned him into Stephen King with a capital S and a capital K, and into the writer that he is today. So for that reason, it's fantastic. You all know the story about this group of schoolboys stranded on this deserted island, and how their empathy, their kindness, their camaraderie breaks down very rapidly in this context of scarce resources, and bringing out this kind of bloodthirsty element of human relations when there is this kind of existential pressure on a group. Yeah, we're just going to look through these ones really quickly. Emily Bronte, Wuthering Heights. We all know and love this wild ride of obsession and anxiety, and the transgressive and the forbidden and the subversive, on the repercussions of cold-hearted intergenerational violence. And this is available in Penguin Popular Classics. You really don't need to lay out a huge investment in getting these. The same for the next ones. I've got Frankenstein. You can see there's many variations of this. I've got the 1818 text in the Oxford World Classics, and then I've got the 1831 edition in the Penguin Classics. Fantastic stuff. Both of these have really good introductions. So for me, those cheaper editions suffice. Then Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. In the deluxe editions, these are coupled together, but I've just got these two Penguin Popular Classics with the original illustrations, complete and unabridged. For me, that does the trick. Then we've got Chinua Achebe, Things Fall Apart. Now, this is actually an omnibus in the deluxe edition series. It is a trilogy. I've just got the first work in that trilogy, which is the novel that really made his reputation, about the clash of modern Western society and values being brought into Africa, and the clash with the Western ideals, and then with traditional tribal politics and philosophy, and the violence that ensues in this clash, the innocent bystanders who are caught in this maelstrom of history. And then lastly, we will look at Virginia Woolf's Orlando. Now, for those of you that watch my channel regularly, you know that we talk about Virginia Woolf a lot. I'll leave links to videos in which I just go all in on Virginia Woolf. But I've never talked about Orlando for one reason or another, and I don't need to have this in a deluxe edition. I've got this really affordable Collins Classics edition. Orlando is Woolf's strangest novel. It's quite apart from the rest of her body of work in that it's got this element of fantasy and this very, very jarring, strange shift in the identity in the person of the protagonist, Orlando. I won't give it away if you haven't read this book, but it really sweeps a broad swathe of time, of English history, which is again quite different from Woolf's normally temporally concentrated works of fiction. So this one is quite apart. It was a kind of love letter to her one-time lover, Vita Sackville-West, who's also an amazing writer, by the way. Yeah, those are 10 examples, 10 alternatives that you might fancy reading, or you may have read them before. But those are alternative editions. Like I said, I clearly have some of these big deluxe editions. I've got 6 of them here, but a couple of them, at least half of them I got secondhand. And yeah, we're going to leave it there. Let me know what you think of these. How many of these do you have in this Penguin Classics Deluxe series? How many of these titles have you read? Would you like to see a follow-up? Shall we just keep going and work our way through all 120 odd titles in the series? Would love to hear from you guys. Thanks for watching, and speak to you all soon.